Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something that I think a lot of people have, some curiosity about, or maybe even some personal experience with addiction.
Mm-hmm.
So you sent in this document from Narcotics Anonymous,
Okay.
and it's really about answering this really heavy question.
Yeah.
Am I an addict?
Right.
And this source doesn't beat around the bush. It really dives right into a series of questions that are designed to make you think,
Yeah.
really think about your relationship with drugs.
Yeah, what's so interesting here is that the source really emphasizes how important honesty is when you're answering these questions.
Right.
But, honesty can be a really tough thing.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about something as sensitive as addiction.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, who wants to admit that they might have a problem?
Right.
It's scary. And this document actually acknowledges that fear. It talks about how people often try to rationalize their drug use, almost like a way to protect themselves.
Absolutely. The source even has some quotes from people who are struggling with this.
Oh, wow.
For example, one person says, "I know I take drugs, but I'm not an addict.
Right.
I have real problems," as if those two things can't coexist.
Right.
So this kind of denial, that's a common hurdle in recognizing addiction.
I see how that plays into the whole stigma around addiction, too.
Sure.
People might fear being judged or labeled, so they just push down those difficult feelings.
Yeah.
But what I found really eye-opening here is that the source, it stresses that it's not just about the drug itself.
Right.
It's about the why.
The why.
Why are you using drugs? What purpose are they serving in your life?
That's such a crucial point because when we start looking at addiction through that lens, we start to see it less as a moral failing
Right.
and more as this complex interplay of psychological and even neurological factors.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. Like, what is happening in the brain when we talk about addiction?
Well, our brains, they have this thing called a reward pathway.
Okay.
It's designed to make us feel good when we do things that are essential for survival,
Right.
like eating or socializing.
Mm-hmm.
But drugs, they can kind of hijack this pathway,
Oh, wow.
releasing this flood of dopamine
Okay.
and creating this really intense, pleasurable feeling. And over time, the brain becomes accustomed to this artificial high. And then it takes more and more of the drug to achieve that same effect. This is how dependence and addiction develop.
So it's almost like the brain gets tricked into thinking that the drug is essential for survival.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that's why simply telling someone to just stop
Right.
isn't effective. They're battling a very powerful force within their own brain chemistry.
That makes the section in the document about fear and denial even more understandable.
Right.
If your brain is literally telling you that you need this substance to function,
Yeah.
it's no wonder people resist the idea that they might be addicted.
It's a very powerful and often misunderstood aspect of addiction. The source highlights how this denial can stem from the impact addiction has on a person's life,
Yeah.
their self-esteem, their relationships, their ability to just function in everyday life.
Right.
It can be a downward spiral that's incredibly hard to break free from.
It sounds like the document is really trying to meet people where they're at, acknowledging the fear and all those complex emotions that come with confronting this issue. It doesn't sugarcoat the realities of addiction, but it also offers a glimmer of hope through these stories of recovering addicts in Narcotics Anonymous.
That's where the document takes a really interesting turn. It shifts from this kind of intense self-reflection
Right?
to sharing the experiences of people who have found recovery within the fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous.
It's like they're saying, look, we understand what you're going through because we've been there ourselves.
Right.
And there is a way out. But how does recovery actually happen? Like, what's the magic formula?
Well, there's no magic formula. But the source emphasizes that recovery is a process, often begins with three crucial realizations.
And those are?
The first is that you are powerless over your addiction. It's not about willpower or a lack of character.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that addiction is a disease. And it requires a different approach than simply trying to white-knuckle your way through it.
That's got to be a tough pill to swallow, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, our society puts so much emphasis on personal responsibility. Admitting powerlessness almost feels like giving up.
Right. It can seem that way initially, but it's actually a really crucial step towards taking back control.
Okay.
Because when you acknowledge that you can't fight this battle alone, you open yourself up to seeking help and support
Right.
from others who understand what you're going through.
And that leads to the second realization, right?
Mm-hmm.
The source mentions taking responsibility for your recovery.
Exactly. And again, this isn't about blaming yourself.
Right.
It's about shifting the focus from, why me to what can I do about it? And this is where the community aspect of Narcotics Anonymous comes in. The source highlights that, recovery is what happens in our meetings, really emphasizing the power of shared experience and support.
So it's about connecting with people who get it,
Right.
who've walked a similar path and can offer guidance and encouragement. It sounds like that sense of community creates a space where people can be honest about their struggles without judgment.
That is a key element of recovery. Because when you're surrounded by people who understand, you're less likely to fall back into those patterns of denial and isolation that often perpetuate addiction. It's about creating that network of support that helps you stay accountable and motivated on your journey.
And that brings us to the third realization, the need to stop blaming external factors.
Yes.
I'm guessing this ties back to that whole honesty thing we were talking about earlier.
It absolutely does. This realization is about taking ownership of your actions and choices.
Okay.
Now, it doesn't mean ignoring the role that external factors may have played in your addiction. But it's about recognizing that dwelling on the past or blaming others isn't going to help you move forward.
So it's about focusing on what you can control, which is your commitment to recovery and the steps that you take each day to stay on that path.
Precisely. It's about empowering yourself to make positive changes, even when it feels incredibly difficult.
This whole section about recovery is so powerful. I love how the source doesn't shy away from the tough stuff, but it also offers this incredible sense of hope and possibility. It's like they're saying, hey, this is hard, but you don't have to do it alone, and there is a brighter future waiting for you.
And that message is amplified by the document's concluding statement: the ultimate weapon for recovery is the recovering addict.
Wow.
This reinforces the idea that lived experience is invaluable in helping others navigate the challenges of addiction.
It makes sense. Who better to guide you through the process than someone who's been there themselves? Someone who understands the struggles, the temptations, the triumphs and setbacks that come with recovery.
Right. That lived experience brings a level of authenticity and empathy that's hard to replicate. It's like having a mentor who can offer practical advice, emotional support, and just a reminder that you're not alone in this journey.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
We've talked about the fear and denial that often surround addiction, the science behind how it impacts the brain, and this really powerful message of recovery that's presented in this document. But let's bring it back to our listener. What does all of this mean for someone who might be tuning in and wondering if they're struggling with addiction?
That's a great question. I think the first and most important takeaway is this: if you're questioning your relationship with drugs, you are not alone.
Right.
And there's no shame in asking for help.
It sounds like the first step is that honest self-reflection that the document emphasizes.
It's exactly.
Take some time to consider the questions that are posed in this source. Be honest with yourself about the role that drugs are playing in your life. And if you're feeling overwhelmed or unsure where to turn, there are resources available to help you.
Right. And the document actually includes a list of those resources.
It does.
So listeners can explore those further if they're resonating with the content.
Yeah. And even if you're not personally struggling with addiction, I think there's a lot to be gained from understanding this complex issue.
I completely agree. Because at its core, this isn't just about drugs. It's about human behavior, the power of connection, and the resilience of the human spirit.
Beautifully said. Understanding addiction can help us all cultivate more empathy, reduce stigma, and create a more supportive environment for those who are struggling.
And maybe that's the most powerful takeaway of all.
Yeah.
That by simply learning about addiction,
we can all play a part in fostering a more compassionate and understanding world. You know, as we've been talking about this document, it's really struck me how it manages to be both direct and compassionate at the same time.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
It is.
Acknowledging the harsh realities of addiction while also offering that message of hope and the possibility of recovery.
It's like they're saying, we see you, we hear you, and we're here to help. And that just seems to be the essence of Narcotics Anonymous.
Absolutely. It's about creating a space where people can feel safe and supported as they navigate this, incredibly challenging journey.
And I think that message extends beyond just those who are struggling with addiction.
All right.
It reminds us all that we have the power to make a difference in each other's lives simply by listening with an open heart and offering a helping hand.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder that even small acts of kindness and understanding can have a ripple effect, creating a more compassionate and supportive world for everyone.
So to our listener, we'll leave you with this thought. How can you use what you've learned today to challenge your own perceptions of addiction? And how can you, in your own way, contribute to a more understanding and supportive community?
Remember, change starts with each of us. By choosing empathy over judgment and understanding over fear, we can all play a part in creating a world where recovery is not just possible, but embraced.
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and as always, stay curious.